My father and stepmother tried to marry me off to save their company. So I vanished, built a fortune, and bought it back at auction without saying a word. They didn't recognize me when I walked into that boardroom. Not my father, not my stepmother, not even Emma. She looked right through me, which was funny really because for most of my life that's all she ever did. I took a seat across from them, calm, quiet, perfectly composed. The woman they were all waiting for was already in the room. They just didn't know it yet. They spoke in low voices, tense, desperate. Something about restructuring, about needing one last investor to sign off before the company crumbled completely. And there I was, legs crossed, expression unreadable, waiting. But before I get to what happened next, let me take you back to when I was just a girl with no last name worth protecting. You see, I wasn't born into the Carter family, not officially. I was the result of an affair my father's mistake from his 20s swept under the rug until his wife finally agreed to do the right thing and take me in. I was 10 when I moved in. And from day one, I knew I wasn't family. I was an obligation. They gave me a room at the far end of the hall. Not next to Emma. Never next to Emma. Emma was everything I wasn't. Blonde, beautiful, brilliant. She danced ballet, spoke fluent French, and had a portfolio by the time she turned 16. She was the daughter they showed off at charity galas, and I was the one they conveniently forgot to mention. I remember once at a dinner party someone asked who I was. Emma smiled and said, "Oh, she's just a distant cousin staying with us for a while." My stepmother didn't correct her. Neither did my father. That was my role, silent, shadowed, unseen. But I wasn't bitter, not then. I thought if I worked hard enough, proved myself, they'd accept me. So I studied late, took care of chores no one asked me to do. I even stayed quiet when Emma's boyfriends flirted with me just so I wouldn't cause trouble. And still, I was always wrong. Too loud, too quiet, too awkward, too invisible. Until the day I said no. It happened when I was 17. The company was in trouble, some investment fell through. I didn't know the details, but I remember the night like it was yesterday. My father called me into his office. He didn't ask, he told me. There was a man, older, wealthy, a potential partner. If I agreed to marry him, we'd secure funding. The company would survive. He's kind, my father said. He's powerful, my stepmother added. He's not that old, Emma smirked. He was 36. I was 17. I asked what would happen if I said no. No one answered. That silence was louder than any scream. So I made my choice. I stood up, looked my father in the eye, and said, "I'm not for sale." The next morning, my suitcase was waiting at the front door. No note, no apology, no ride, just me and the world. I had $17, no college acceptance, no safety net, just a birth certificate with my mother's name, and a middle name they never bothered to remember. I watched the gates close behind me that day, and I knew whatever future I had, I'd have to build it with my own 2 hands, and I did. But they wouldn't know that, not yet, because at this moment in that boardroom, they still saw me as no one. And that was exactly how I wanted it. There were no dramatic storms, no pouring rain, no thunder rolling behind me as I stepped into the real world. Just silence. And the realization that no one was coming after me. I spent my first night in a 24-hour diner, huddled in the corner booth sipping black coffee I couldn't afford. The waitress let me stay until her shift ended. She didn't ask questions. She just left a blanket on the seat next to me before walking out. That was the closest thing to kindness I'd see in a while. The next few weeks blurred together. Shelters, cheap motels, public restrooms. I learned quickly that being invisible wasn't a disadvantage. It was armor. I found work bussing tables at a greasy breakfast joint. The pay was terrible, but the tips were enough for a shared room in a rundown boarding house. The walls were thin. The neighbors were loud. But I had a door I could lock. That was enough. I worked the early morning shift, then took whatever side gigs I could get in the afternoon, flyer distribution, data entry, inventory logging. At night, I sat on the floor of my room with a secondhand laptop and borrowed Wi-Fi from the gas station across the street. I read everything: business news, investment blogs, Reddit threads about side hustles. Anything that could teach me how money worked, how power worked. It wasn't revenge I was after. Not then. I wasn't angry, I was awake. When you have nothing, even the smallest piece of knowledge feels like gold. So I devoured it. I studied corporate law forums, watched lectures on finance strategy and asset flipping. I printed out balance sheets of Fortune 500 companies just to understand how money flowed, what made an empire rise, and what made it fall. I didn't have a degree, didn't have a mentor, didn't even have a real name, just the one I signed on customer receipts. But I had time, I had hunger, and I had no one else to lean on. There's a strange kind of strength that comes from being forgotten, from knowing that if you fall, no one is going to catch you. Eventually, I saved enough to enroll in night classes, basic accounting, business structure, later investment modeling. My classmates were all older people changing careers, bored retirees. They ignored me. I preferred it that way, because while they studied for promotions, I was building armor. I kept working through the day, studying through the night, and sleeping in short, dreamless bursts. 3 years passed like that. And then one afternoon, as I waited for my bus after class, I saw the headline on someone's phone, "Carter and Vail, on the brink, boardroom scandal threatens generational legacy." I blinked. Carter and Vail. That was the company name. My father's company. The one he nearly sold me off to save. I followed the story, quietly. Emma was now CEO. The article praised her resilience, her ambition, her bold ideas. But buried in the fine print was a different story. Layoffs, a failed acquisition, an internal dispute with a supplier that cost them a major contract. Debt they weren't disclosing. It wasn't front-page news. Not yet. But I could read between the lines. They weren't in trouble. They were circling the drain. And that's when something inside me shifted. I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt curious. How do empires fall? Is it one mistake or 1,000 cracks they pretend not to see? I didn't want to destroy them, but I wanted to watch, to understand, to study the collapse from the outside, the way a scientist observes a dying star, dispassionate, analytical, focused. That was the moment I stopped surviving and started planning. Watching them collapse from afar wasn't enough. Not anymore. I didn't want to just witness the fall. I wanted to own the wreckage, so I started small. Using a name no one would trace back to me, I registered a holding company in Delaware. Clean, simple, unremarkable. Then I opened a second one, overseas, obscure, shielded. I funneled my modest savings into them slowly, cautiously. Every dollar I made from side projects, freelance consulting, and market arbitrage, I reinvested. Bit by bit, my portfolio grew. But this wasn't about getting rich. It was about positioning. Carter and Vail was bleeding cash, so they began selling off non-essential assets. Warehouses, minor subsidiaries, regional distribution rights. Everyone else saw liabilities. I saw opportunity. I acquired 2 of their former supply partners under shell companies, rebranded them, streamlined them, then positioned them to sign new contracts with their competitors. Every time they took a step back, I was already 2 steps ahead. Emma's leadership was a disaster of style over substance. She threw lavish product launches without proper testing, tried influencer campaigns that burned through millions with no return, alienated 2 long-term investors by ignoring regulatory deadlines. And I watched and waited. One of her biggest mistakes was letting go of a long-standing logistics partner. Publicly, she said they were outdated and no longer aligned with brand vision. Privately, it was because they refused to fund her marketing campaign. I reached out to that same partner under a different name. We didn't talk about vision. We talked about efficiency, margin, trust. 2 months later, we signed a new contract. I gave them stable income, and in return, they let me control a critical part of Carter and Vail's distribution chain without them even realizing it. Emma scrambled to replace them. She found a flashy alternative. They overcharged and underdelivered. By the time she caught on store, shelves were empty. Delivery delays went viral. The hashtag Carter collapse trended for 3 days. Meanwhile, I was buying. Quietly, strategically. I approached former shareholders, people burnt out by Emma's chaos, desperate to offload before it got worse. I offered clean exits, generous buyouts, no red flags, no questions. They never knew they were selling back into the same bloodline they'd written off years ago. Every transfer brought me closer, 5%, 9, 13. At 15, I paused just long enough to adjust the structure and reinforce anonymity. At 18, I stopped. Not because I couldn't go further, but because that was enough. Enough to swing votes. Enough to block proposals. Enough to save them, or sink them. And still no one knew I was there. I was the ghost in their system. The investor no one saw. The shadow behind every failed deal. I didn't need credit. I didn't need applause. All I wanted was control. The kind that doesn't need permission. The kind that comes without begging. The kind they once told me I'd never have because I was just a girl. Funny how things change. By the end of that fiscal quarter, Carter & Vail was in freefall. Their last safety net, a corporate merger with an overseas partner, was quietly withdrawn. Because I'd bought into that company too. And the moment the due diligence team flagged Carter & Vail as high risk, the deal vanished. Emma blamed a hostile market. I smiled. By the time the board called for an emergency meeting to invite their largest stakeholder to the table, I was already holding the pen. They wanted a savior, and they didn't even know her name. It started with an email, one message, no name, no attachments, just a link and a question. Is this how a CEO runs a legacy brand? It landed in the inbox of 3 board members, 1 auditor and a senior partner at the firm's outside counsel. By the end of the day, the board had convened an emergency session. By the end of the week, Emma's carefully polished empire was burning. The audit uncovered everything: shell companies, consulting fees funneled to friends, inflated invoices for projects that never existed, luxury vacations marked as brand development trips. A marketing firm owned by her college roommate paid millions with no deliverables. And worse, she'd doctored quarterly reports to hide it all. The paper trail wasn't subtle, just arrogant. Because she thought no one would ever question her. The press pounced. Golden CEO under fire for fraud allegations. Carter & Vail, a family name in crisis. Emma Carter from darling to disgrace. She tried to get ahead of it. Held a press conference. Wore all white. Stood in front of the company's logo like she was preparing for canonization. She cried. Blamed her team. Said she'd been misled. Said she trusted the wrong people. But crocodile tears don't move markets. The stock crashed 23% in 2 days. Suppliers pulled contracts. Retailers demanded refunds. Employees started leaking emails to reporters. Hashtag Emma exposed trended for a week. Internally, the company fractured. Department heads turned on each other. Resignations rolled in like waves. Even her own PR team walked out mid-crisis. And I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Because the truth is, people like Emma don't need enemies. They just need space to self-destruct. All I did was give her the stage. I didn't confirm I sent that email. Didn't deny it either. Let them wonder. Let them question how everything unraveled so perfectly. My father, to his credit, held on longer than most. Tried to calm investors. Called in favors. Made promises he couldn't keep. But no one trusted him anymore. He had handed the company to Emma on a silver platter, and now that silver was melting in his hands. Eventually, he did what prideful men only do when they have no other choice. He asked for help. Or rather, he asked his board to reach out to the firm's largest silent investor. The one holding enough shares to stop the bleeding, or let the company die. That investor was me. I got the invitation on a Thursday. Polite, professional, desperate. The board would be convening in 1 week. Attendance strongly encouraged. Decisions would be made about the company's future. If I wished to save what was left, now was the time. I read the email twice. Then I closed my laptop and made myself tea. No rush, no adrenaline, just clarity. For the first time in years, they were the ones waiting on me. Not Emma, not the favorite, not the golden girl. Me. And I had no intention of letting them off easy. The boardroom looked exactly as I remembered. Cold, polished, sterile. I walked in 10 minutes early, dressed in charcoal gray, sharp, clean, forgettable. No assistants, no entourage, no name tag. Just me and the pen they'd been waiting for. They didn't flinch. To them, I was just another anonymous investor, a silent partner, the kind with deep pockets and no opinions. Perfect. The board was already seated, flipping through binders, whispering numbers that didn't matter anymore. Emma sat at the head of the table, pale but defiant. She still wore power like perfume, overwhelming and artificial. My father was beside her, thinner than I remembered. His suit didn't fit quite right. His eyes darted around the room like a man searching for exits no longer there. They nodded at me. I nodded back. No one recognized me. It was almost funny. The meeting began. Charts, projections, recovery strategies, a list of job cuts, a debt consolidation plan, and then the plea. We believe with a strategic capital injection, one board member said, and a shift in brand direction, we can recover. Of course, another added that depends on the support of our largest investor. They all turned to me. Emma smiled, tight professional. We'd be honored, she said, to have your continued confidence in the Carter legacy. I took my time flipping through their packet. Page after page of desperate math and empty buzzwords. Then I looked up. My confidence, I said calmly, is conditional. Silence. Emma blinked. I see. And what are your terms? I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. Emma resigns, effective immediately. She relinquishes all voting shares and board rights. All decision-making authority transfers to the investor group I represent. The words landed like a thunderclap. Emma stared at the paper, then at me, then back at the paper. No, she said, voice cracking. This is outrageous. You can't. My father leaned forward. There must be some room to negotiate. There isn't, I interrupted. Still calm, still cold. You want my money, you get my terms. The board said nothing. They didn't even look surprised. Emma stood, hands shaking. This is insane. Who even are you to make these demands? I looked at her for the first time, really looked. And then I smiled. Not out of malice, just clarity. You don't recognize me, do you? She frowned. I stood up, took a slow step forward, and said it quietly, evenly. You once introduced me at a party as your distant cousin. You told people I was staying with the family for a while. You laughed when they kicked me out. 17 years old, no money, no name, just a suitcase and silence. Her lips parted. My father froze. I took another step. I'm not a cousin. I'm not distant. I'm the girl you tried to sell for a business deal. I'm the daughter you erased from the family photo. And then I dropped the final line, I own 18% of this company. Emma's mouth opened, then closed. Her face went white. My father reached for something to say but came up empty. No apology, no defense. Just a man watching his kingdom fall. To someone he never thought would matter. I turned to the board. The offer stands, but only with my conditions. Take it or collapse with her. The room was silent for a long, long moment. Then, one by one, heads began to nod. And just like that, it was done. The vote was unanimous. Emma's resignation was accepted. Her shares were transferred. Control of the company shifted quietly, cleanly, completely. She didn't speak as she signed the documents. Her hands trembled, but her mouth stayed shut. The same mouth that once called me dead weight, now silent. My father didn't look at me, not once. He just kept his eyes on the table, hands folded like he might disappear if he stayed still long enough. When it was my turn, I signed without hesitation, and just like that, Carter and Vale was no longer theirs. It was mine, but I wasn't staying. They asked after the meeting if I'd consider stepping into a leadership role, if I wanted to rebuild the legacy. If I'd come home, I declined, calmly, politely, because I didn't fight for their name. I fought for mine. I didn't do this to belong. I did it to walk away on my own terms. No apologies, no explanations, no reintroductions, just closure. As I walked out of the building, the sun was setting behind the skyline. The same city that once swallowed me whole, now opened in front of me like a chessboard. My phone buzzed. Another offer, another deal, another empire waiting for someone who could see what no one else did. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and kept walking. I didn't look back. Because I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't broken. I was free. They built their world on the belief that I'd never matter, that I'd never rise, that I'd never come back. And they were right, I didn't come back for them. I came back to end the chapter, on my terms, with my name, without their permission. And in the end, I didn't need revenge. Not the kind that screams. Not the kind that burns everything down. I didn't need to watch them fall. I just needed to rise. Without them.